paper was inspired from the conversations that I had in Canada. And it was a paper. There are 3 other group members that I talked to were also teachers, and they were like, "Oh, there's a paper in here based on conversations that we are having." And then this did not start as a research project. It started as a real life experiences, conversations, and then turned into a research paper. So in this presentation today, I will be talking about work-life dynamics, and there are 3 concepts here. The first concept is work-life balance, which is the ideal, unattainable, utopian equilibrium position where your life or your personal, family, spiritual, religious, cultural, social commitments, interests, responsibilities in life are you're satisfied with how you're doing them, and they're balanced by how you see your work, or as in the paid employment. Sometimes, going to the gym is also work, and cooking is also work, but we're looking at paid versus non-paid work. So life here covers only the non-paid, recreational, personal, health-related stuff, and the work part here covers the paid employment. So when we talk about work-life balance, that means that both of them are at equilibrium position. You go to your work, you get your work done, you go home, and then you have a nice life. So there's a balance between the two. This is a very broad conceptualization of work-life balance. The second related terminology here is work-life conflict, which means you're sitting here during a presentation, but you wish that you had eaten a better lunch, or that you had gone to the gym before coming to the conference, or that that you have thoughts coming in about your personal life, non-work related, and they affect how you are working. And when you go home, then you are still working on emails, and your children are crying, or you have to get takeouts, and you have to. So there's thoughts of work that seep into your personal life. That is called work-life conflict. Interference, conflict, tension between work and family roles. And the third concept here is work-life enrichment, which is that you get money from the job that you do, and then you afford a trip to wherever you want to go. So it's the good things, the connections, the positivity that you get out of performing one role, and it affects how you perform the other role. So there are 3 concepts here. And in this, we'll be looking at the 3 concepts together because they are complicated. And this is how the research was, that it was difficult for the participants to differentiate and to say this is only work-life conflict happening, because if you question them about work-life conflict, they say, but I want the job because I like the job. So job is not a burden really, it's also a source of escape and happiness and a fun place. So this is the academics, as in university teachers' experiences and reflections of work-life dynamics, and a relational framework, which means we are saying it's not just about me as a person, it's about the society, the neighborhood, the university I'm working in, the country I'm living in right now. So if I was in Pakistan, it would be very different. And this is based or drawn up from the pandemic. So it was during the pandemic. I just immigrated to Canada before the pandemic, and then the pandemic hit, so it was perfect timings for me to take out all the tensions. Lots of terminologies, but I wanted to be sure that we have a groundwork to begin with. So the Covid-19 had lots of positive and negative things for academics, generally speaking, and this is broad conceptualization, I'm just being very broad and superficial here and giving a laundry list. So the pandemic resulted in teachers working from home or leaving jobs and then taking on 2 or 3 different jobs. Or they switched the way that they were working. So more research or less research, more teaching or less teaching, and so on. And then there was social isolation, social disconnections that they had when they were at work. And then there was a concept of alienation, and which did lead to, or it could have led to, less motivation, lower engagement, and all the emotional well-being stuff. However, it also provided a chance to reflect, slow down, and take on linear activities, eat healthier, have more downtime, disconnect a bit. So there were pros and cons of the pandemic and how it affected teachers that I talked to. The second point here is the blurring of boundaries between work and home, which means that if you were working from home, which most of us were doing during the COVID, then it was not very easy to not attend the bell. Not, if there's food delivery, for example, then you have to disconnect your call and go and turn off your video and go and look There were meetings that I attended with my son in the bathtub, and I was like, I need to turn off my camera because I have to take him out of the shower, and I was in the middle of meetings, and so the blurring of boundaries between work and home became very loud because of working from home. So traditionally, in the theory of work-life balance, they say when you're home, you're home. It's a physical border around home. And when you're at work, there's a physical different work. You have to travel between work and home, but because of COVID, then you're working from home. So the boundaries, physical boundaries blurred. Yeah, and then the gender roles were kind of exaggerated and revealed. So women were seen to be taking on more childcare responsibilities, domestic responsibilities, while men were, this is very broad, again, this is based on the literature, that men were seen to be taking a back end. So it was very loud. Why am I supposed to be cooking and why are you not? So these became more visible. And parents, especially because of the shutdown of daycares and childcares, and if they're working at home and not considered emergency workers in emergency services, then it just became, it was a tense situation. So these things, then, this was the background of work-life balance and how it relates to the pandemic. So I've explained this mainly that because of the pandemic, how we were managing work and life before the pandemic became different during the pandemic, and the consequences in terms of positive work-life enrichment or the negative work-life conflict changed because of the pandemic. So this study looks at how the pandemic affected the work-life balance for academics. Is that okay? Yeah. So there are three theories here that I'm using. I would like to emphasize, I've explained broader theory that work is separate from home physically. And then there are domain keepers, which is like your boss might say, why are you not replying to my emails? Within 24 hours, it has to be replied to my email. So if you want to say, I'm drawing borders here, even I'm working from home and not replying 24/7, not working 24/7, even when I'm home. If you want to draw those psychological borders in your head of disconnecting from work, there might be demands from home, domain keepers, who might say, no, that cannot happen. So institutional demands can be there, domain keepers. And then even if you say, I'm locking the door, please do not disturb me, I'm in a meeting, your pet might come in, and then you can't really control these things. You can't control them, but it was just an effort that you had to put into. And the intersectionality is that it was not just men doing this and then women doing this. No, it depended on the family structure, it depended on the support network, it depended on ease of access to childcare, it depended on resources, it depended on ease of, so the findings show later that it depended on how comfortable teachers were adapting to technology, because some loved it and some hated it, and then there was a transition phase which evoked more tensions, different tensions that people had not planned for. And I will be using we used a multi-level framework because that's just how we see things, that individuals are in institutions, they are in a society, and they are affected and they affect, so the levels interact with one another. So the work-life balance policies from the university affected, whether you're in a private institution or a public institution, it affected how you worked and how you saw work, and so it affected your work-life balance. Pure qualitative research, purposive and snowball sampling, and it was not just about physical access and like talking to the participants, but it was also about letting them talk and feeling, not seeing them as respondents, but seeing them as the keynote session today can be mentioned reciprocal and based on trust. So letting them vent a bit, even if it meant that the interview was dragging on and you were like, come back to the topic, this is not a counseling therapy session, but you give them the space to vent and give them the space to share their thoughts and let them probe. You don't just say, this is 3 questionnaires and you fill, these are 3 questions, you fill them and you're like, you can't do that in qualitative research, not the way that we saw it. So there was social, emotional access to what the participants were saying. Only 6 interviews, there were details, between 2 to 3 hours, spread over a number of sessions whenever we talked to each other. Some may say that this is not enough, but we were looking for textured, nuanced, in-depth experiences, so that could be seen as a justification for not enough number of interviews. if we continue the study, the pandemic is over now, and well, no, sorry, I shouldn't have said that. We never know. I'm not wearing the mask. There could be another study with more participants, but even what we were looking at to tease out the tensions and to really go in deep, I think we got that. So we said it was okay, and this is a conference statement. So what the findings show is that there's a depending on where you were working and what your family structure is and how many children you have at home and how you feel about the pandemic, how prepped you were for the social disconnection and the change of technology. They were very different. There are no clear-cut answers here on how the pandemic affected anybody. People reacted very differently. Some loved it, some hated it. Some loved it one day, hated it another day. But what it does call for, I'll move straight to the research implications because I think this is what really matters here. That the performance evaluation criteria, performance evaluation process of the universities needs to change to accommodate the differences in the personal situations of the faculty members. If there were, for example, you were expected to have 3 research papers in a year, you can't now. It has to be more ethical and mindful of how the pandemic affected the way you could do research, for example, going to the fields and actually conducting interviews or collecting data. It affected the demands on the individual faculty members to learn to use technology should be taken into account. The quality of teaching should be taken into account because if you were, there were different answers, and I don't want to quote my participants here, but there were varied answers between I loved my teaching online, I love teaching online, I don't want to go back to campus, to the other extreme where I hated it and I'm so glad to be back on campus. And it depended on the personality, the home atmosphere, the infrastructure, the resources that individual employees had. It also depended on the institutional support, the institutional culture. Some institutions were very accommodating and flexible, but others were like, sorry, you cannot be turning your videos off during your online meetings, and how dare you not keep your video, why, mute and unmute drama that went on during the pandemic. The organizational culture and leadership so it's not just the individual's reaction on how they were dealing with the work-life balance, on how they on their experiences of work-life balance. The role of leadership here is quite important. That's what we found. If the leaders were empathetic and compassionate, and they had the agility, I'm quoting Candy here, if they had the agility and adaptability to go with the flow, then this translated into support for the faculty members also. But autocratic kind of leaders may have given very different rigid responses and led to increased depression, increased stress, increased burnout amongst the faculty members. There was a paper earlier today also on burnout and how it was triggered or worsened during the pandemic. So we are mainly suggesting that our performance evaluation processes, if there are any decision makers in this room, then maybe a takeaway for you could be that when you do the performance evaluation for the faculty, poor faculty like myself, then you could reconsider how the performance evaluation needs to be adjusted because of the consequences or the effect of pandemic on work-life balance of the faculty members and how it relates to teaching effectiveness and learning. That is all. I may have finished early. If there are any questions.